Hi, everyone. Welcome. Just so you know, this session is being recorded and you're all currently on mute, but you'll be welcome to unmute later on in the process.
Cool. Welcome. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started because we've got a quick amount of time here, and it's a smaller group. That's great. So we'll have some time to make this a little more conversational, answer questions as we go. So again, welcome. My name is Lee Hoffman. I'm one of the Associate Deans of Admission at Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina.
And hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Fredo Garcia. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I serve as the Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas.
Cool. So today we are going to talk about that time after you get through doing all of the pieces of the application and you finally hit that submit button. We do a lot of workshops. We talk a lot about getting the application done and all the things you have to do, the testing, the essays, all of those pieces. But then, what happens after that? And so we're going to talk a little bit in kind of broad strokes about what happens on the college side. So you have a little bit of idea of what we're doing while, you're sitting at home and going to class and finishing out your senior year. And then hopefully you'll also be able to take away some pieces of advice of ways that you can continue to advocate for yourself in the process and things you could and should be doing after you hit that submit button. So not that you have a ton of stuff left to do, but there are opportunities for you to keep your college search and application process going. So that being said, we're gonna jump on into the presentation. So the first thing you should do after you hit submit is to take a moment to celebrate, to pause, go treat yourself, go spend some time with friends and family. It's a big deal. I don't think people give themselves enough credit for the amount of organization and thought and self-reflection and all of those pieces that go into applying to college. So take time to reward yourself for that, however that looks, because you've accomplished a very difficult, big task just by getting all those pieces together and submitted.
All right, so we're going to jump into the application review timeline, right? And this is a little bit different at each institution and does not really involve you as the student, right, anymore, but there is a lot that happens between that moment that you hit submit and the moment that you receive news or feedback, right, about your application. And so, Lee, you want to start us off?
Yeah, the first thing I like to tell people is that once you hit submit, and this is not to scare you, just to give you a piece of advice, is it's not automatic. So when you hit that submit button on the common application, on the coalition application, on the Pressbridge, whatever, that school's application, there's actually kind of a long process. It kind of lives, and this is very, very simplified, but it kind of lives with that application. And then usually overnight or once per day, that data is then transferred to the college. That college then brings that data in and has to verify it in their system to then put it into play for your application. Some places, smaller places like Nicole and mine, they're actual humans that are the rock stars of the process. Like, they are amazing. They are our processing and operations team members. They will go through and confirm that that is in fact your transcript, that that is the correct recommendation letter, that that's all the pieces. And they might email you and say if something's missing or if it doesn't look right, but they actually verify those before they put them into your file officially, and then send them over to us to read. So there can be a little bit of a delay. So you will have an applicant portal no matter where you apply. A lot of them are going to look very similar because most of us use the same systems, but you'll see either red X's or green check marks. Green check marks, we've received it, it's good. X's, it might be pending or holding, and you might say, hey, I turned in that recommendation letter a couple of days ago. Well, it just may not be verified yet. And so that's where applying not the night before can be very helpful if you're anxious about getting all your things. There is a little bit of a grace period for most of us. So if we're waiting to confirm, that's not on you as long as your application's in by the deadline. But just know, don't panic, but also keep checking the applicant portal, because if it's been a while and still something is outstanding, you can contact the school and say, hey, I see that you're still missing a recommendation letter. Can I get that sent back over, or things like that? But there are people that work in our offices that their specialization is making sure your application pieces are in the right spot and then they get shifted over to us as admission officers to read.
Right. And so then that's that next step, which again varies by institution and even different for Lee and I as well. But there is typically like a first reader or a team of readers who's sort of the first line of defense on your application and reviewing that to go through the institution's process, depending on what that looks like. So that initial review might be a few minutes. It might be really the full blown review of 30 to 40 minutes that is spent on an application. And the process, again, is different internally. So it's not usually at institutions, first app in means first app out, right? There's some sort of delineation between which applications should be read first. Institutions have different timelines, right? If there's early decision candidates that come through at the same time that maybe early action candidates come through, there's an earlier notification for early decision, right? So that logically it makes sense those students get reviewed. So just because your application is in does not mean that your application is being reviewed tomorrow, right? It might get reviewed that week. It might get reviewed in 2 months. And so really knowing that, if it's a November 1st deadline and a notification deadline of December 15th, your application could be reviewed, within that span, either at the beginning or towards the end, depending on the institution.
Yeah, and it's really hard to say. I know some students ask, hey, if I apply sooner, is there a benefit to that? That's still a great question to ask, because in certain places you might get earlier notifications, rolling admission, for example, different places, but for the majority, no benefit to applying right now. A lot of students think that it might show their interest. We don't really look at the application date so much. It's more of the content of the application. So find that sweet spot between trying to get in super early or waiting until the night before. But after we do that initial review, additional reviews take place. And again, it depends on the institution, but different places, faculty might read some of the applications, or committees for arts and scholarships might be reading the applications. And so that's why people wonder, why does it take so long? If I applied in December, why do you have to wait until April to tell us, or the end of March? And the truth is if we are spending that much time reading applications, rereading applications, sending them to other people, I will say, us admission officers pretty much spend all of January and February in pajamas, and we do have to go into the office sometimes, but we are, holed up reading from early morning, sometimes until late in the evening, because that's just how long it takes to read all those files and get through the whole process. So it's not just read it, make a decision, move on. There's lots of pieces that go along with that.
And then at a lot of institutions, and again, Lee and I work at a place where there's at places where there's holistic review process, there's not rolling admissions decisions. And so there are a lot of these committees and steps in between that notification deadline going out. And so at places like us, we have committees, it means sort of our whole team, right? The admissions team, all of us who read applications are coming together in spaces to make these decisions, talk through candidates, and really shape the class. And this is where you don't have a lot of control. It can be really overwhelming to think about it as a student of why X student is going to be admitted and this student is not going to be admitted. But part of our job is really crafting that first year class, right? Based off each university's missions, goals, what we're looking for each year, right? It might be really different from year to year, from institution to institution. And so we're sort of looking at some of those statistics, looking at some of those needs that we have as an institution to see how we can fill that with the class that we're working on. And any decisions sort of that we've made up to that point are tentative. So they're not final at that point. This is still sort of the conversation, moving, crafting the class, moving things around a little bit in that period of time as well.
Yeah, so we're going to expand on the points of advocacy a little bit more later, but this is where, the whole idea of you have some space to advocate for yourself because things are not decided yet, right? And so we'll give you a little bit of the timeline and some ideas for that in just a moment. But after we get through that shaping process, the committee, decisions are finalized and input. And then there's another whole team of people that are working behind the scenes. I'm on that team at our institution, and I would say I was shocked at how much work goes into making sure that every single decision that goes out is correct. All the letters are correct. Your name's going to show up correctly. So again, that's one of those pieces where decisions take about a week at least to get finalized and ready to go at a place that has kind of smaller high touch pieces. Other places might have some more automated decisions and letters, but it does take a while for that to happen. It's actually a pretty human process of making sure that all of those things are correct. And for most places now, that's going to be mid to late March into that very early April phase of when decisions are released. And there's one final step in the review.
And then for those students who, and we're going to talk about decisions in a moment, but for those decisions who are given that sort of waitlisted earmark, then those students will also be reviewed separately later, right? Because they're sort of still live in this process. They haven't been denied, they haven't been admitted. And so they sort of live in this other grouping. And again, institutions have a process for waitlisted students and reviewing that information that might come in later, depending on what we were looking for. Maybe we asked for an updated transcript or an interview, things like that. And so those students are sort of living off here, right, in this space, and will be reviewed based off the institution's policy for that group of students.
So what do decisions even mean? Some are more obvious than others, but we'll start with a decision most of you are probably hoping for most places you apply. Every once in a while, you apply to a place that you just aren't that excited about. I think we've all applied to. For me, it was my mom's alma mater that I had no intention of going to, but I made her excited for just a minute, right? So did get the admit there, didn't end up going. But the admit is pretty obvious. That's a yes, we hope that you're coming. At early decision, that's binding. You've signed a contract, so you know that you're going there. At regular decision, that is where you get all of the power back in this process. And all of a sudden, it's colleges wanting you to say yes to them. And so we are on pins and needles, usually all of April, waiting to see who's going to say yes to be part of our class. It's actually a very stressful, but also insanely exciting part of our job to be able to get very excited when we're seeing students say yes to us. A deferred decision is used typically an early decision, sometimes an early action. It can mean a little bit of different things, different places, but some important things to know about defer is more often than not, a defer is going to be just pushing you into the next round. So usually it's ED to regular, early decision to regular. And for example, places like us, and Nicole, you can tell us you do the same thing. We only defer a small amount of students. And it's typically if we think something may change between December and March. Or for example, a student is just now taking on kind of their more rigorous curriculum. So we want to see a full semester's worth of grades to kind of have that comfort. Back in the day when we used to use testing, sometimes we'd hold if a student, was waiting on additional testing or something like that. We don't do that anymore. So it's really just to see if something is going to change. Nicole, anything different on defers for you all?
Yeah, I mean, we have slightly different deadlines since we have early action, which is non-binding at that November 1st date. And so we do defer certainly a larger number maybe than at Davidson. But it is for those similar reasons, right? When you're reviewing in November, we don't have any of senior year grades, right? So for students who had maybe a little rocky junior year, right? We're really not 100% sure that they are going to be successful in a challenging curriculum, but senior year looks pretty rigorous. We might defer a student because we want to see that first semester of senior year grades. And we're very clear, institutions, if they defer you, we are going to tell you exactly what you should be doing in that deferral period before you hit the next round so that you understand what that means and what you have control over in the process as well.
Yeah, if you follow what a college says to do during the defer process, that is going to increase your chances of good news in the spring. If you don't follow through with what the college asks for, if you kind of fall off the face of the planet, that's not going to be a great nod for you in the spring. And it depends on that school again for the decision. But if we tell you to do something, I recommend doing that with the defer. A waitlist we've talked about a little bit, but and everywhere uses waitlist differently. But a waitlist is not a no. A waitlist is we see potential, but we just don't have room to say yes to you yet. And again, Davidson is a school that uses a waitlist every year. We're very clear with students with what we want. We ask for additional grades, we ask for updates, we ask for students to be in touch. Students that do that are going to be the first students that we go to off the wait list. But that's a great question to ask a school if they're not clear about it, or if you don't know, you can actually ask, like, historically, how many students do you take off the wait list? And you can get an idea, is it 5 students, is it 50 students? Because that's going to be able to help you plan as you're thinking about your chances with that institution.
And I'll jump in here too. In some institutions will ask for you to accept your place on the wait list as well. And so if you don't do that step, then you certainly wouldn't be pulled from the wait list, because we assume, oh, this student's gone, they treated it like a deny, right? They've now committed someplace else. And so if you are still seriously considering the institution you've been waitlisted at, and they ask you to accept your place on the wait list, you need to make that acceptance. And it's not committing to anything. You're just saying, yes, I'm still considering this institution. Yes, please leave me on the wait list. And that way we as an institution know that you're still there, you're still thinking about us when we go to review waitlist candidates again.
Yeah, just for context, and this is not an exact number by any means, but one of the reasons schools do waitlist a lot of students is because I would say at least half of students that we offer spaces to the waitlist on never fill out the form to say that they want to stay on the waitlist. And then once they start getting other acceptances, excited about other places, that number dwindles really quickly. So that's why I tell students, a waitlist at a school you're really interested in, not necessarily a terrible place, especially if you are staying engaged, staying interested, because you're not actually competing against thousands of students, at a place like a Davidson or, a smaller place. It's actually a much smaller number of students that are vying for those waitlist spots, because people decide to go elsewhere. They decide, some people, you get a little chip on your shoulder when somebody says no, and you're like, I'm done with that place, which is fine. People move on, and that makes space for people that are still really excited about those places. A deny, we all know that no means no. Know that when we put a deny decision on a student, that is not ever done with joy or excitement. It is done with humility, to know that, this is just not going to work, right? Whether it's the academic is not a fit, sometimes the personal is not a fit. And we deny students that we just know are not going to make it off the wait list. And so we don't want to lead them on to say, hey, there's a chance that you might be able to, be here. We want them to get the decision and then move on to the place that they can get excited about. I will say it happens every year. People say, hey, can you reread our application? Can somebody else review the application? We think this is a wrong decision. I will say it's a little insulting, because at a place like a Davidson or a Trinity, you've had multiple people hearing about your application. There's checks and balances. It was a whole committee. So 15 to 20 people sometimes said and agreed on the same decision. And so the answer is no. We're not going to reread. We're not going to re-review. That is the decision for that round. The only caveat to that is if something you found out was like completely wrong in your application, we might re-review that piece as part of it, but I don't think we've ever changed a decision because of that. And that's very rare. The final one I'll point out is conditional admit. That's not used very often, but a place might give you a conditional admit with like kind of an asterisk to say you will be admitted if you, for example, maybe it's the last semester of senior year that you need to complete a course to complete the minimum requirements, for example, or, maintain a certain GPA. That might happen for example, a recruited athlete that needs to have a certain GPA to remain eligible or something like that. So there might be an asterisk, a conditional admit. And so just making sure that you are meeting whatever requirement that school gives you.
All right, so what can you be doing, right? Lee and I talked about this earlier. There's a whole chunk of the process that's happening in the background without you, but there is also a lot that you should be doing as the student, the family members, support system. The biggest thing, and we cannot reiterate this anymore, right, is to check your email. We are, professional staff members sitting in front of computers all day. We use email to communicate with people. And this is really good practice for when you go to college anyways, because that's how your faculty are going to communicate with you, other staff members. And so it's really important that if you decide to use a different email, right, please update us, let us know, because that's who we're going to be sending emails to. We'll be notifying you that materials are missing, ask you if you, needed to apply for financial aid, if the deadline's about to, is approaching. follow-up questions. This is where, as Lee mentioned, your applicant status portal, where you'll log in and actually be able to track the process of your application. We send you an email with how to, what your password is and your login credentials. So it's really important. And we know that you're applying to more than one institution, so you have a lot of these emails, but whatever your system is, to stay organized so that you can be responsive to us and that you're paying attention sort of to what those opportunities are as well in the process.
Yeah, the next thing you can be doing is, keep applying for scholarships, keep looking for opportunities. But financial aid in affording college is the most stressful part of the process. According to families and students, there's lots of surveys and things out of there, and that always comes up as one of the most stressful pieces. With schools, when you apply, typically you're going to be doing your scholarship applications for a specific school around that time. There's earlier deadlines, but one of the things you can be doing a little bit later on is looking for some of those more local scholarships. So a lot of religious organizations, community organizations, even like banks and places like that are locally based, a lot of times will have small scholarships you can apply for. These are typically not the big number ones, but it's a really great opportunity to help get $500 or $1,000 here and there. That can go a long way towards purchasing books or helping with expenses. So make sure you're taking the time to look at those and then continuing to research anything that you need at the colleges as far as financial aid and those pieces.
And then you also want to enjoy your senior year, right? You're not going to have this time back during this window of applying, and then hearing back tends to be, big sporting events and dances, and the last time you're going to perform on your school's theater stage, right? And so really enjoying this, and this is why it is really nice if you've completed a lot of your things in the fall, so you can really have the rest of those months to enjoy. But we hope that you have space to not think about college applications as much, and that you're really taking this time with your family and your friends and the positions that you hold on in your school campuses to enjoy that last year of senior year.
Awesome. So going to that point of self-advocacy, for a lot of students ask me, what can I do? And we kind of talked about that, like, period of time, that long period of time where we're reviewing applications, we're in committee, we're having discussions. And so this is going to depend on a lot of times the size of the school or the type of review. So for both, Nicole and I were at smaller schools. We have really close reviews. We know a lot of our students by name. And so getting an email from a student, and I will say mid-February is probably your sweet spot. But getting an email from the student saying, hey, just want to let you know, I'm still really interested in Davidson or Trinity or X university or college. And here's some updates of things I've been doing or things, how senior year is going. We will get an updated grade report, a mid-year report that we get with your mid-year grades. We get to see that. But if there's anything else you want to add, and it doesn't have to be a long, actually do not send us a long, like 3-paragraph email. Short and sweet is to the point. Not that we don't like hearing about you, but we get lots of email and we've been reading, millions of words at this point in time. But just a short email to say, hey, I'm still interested, update us, any awards that you may have gotten, things that you're excited about, what's happening during senior year. And that can be a really good point of advocacy. The reason being, so for some schools it's different, but for a place like Davidson, and we're pretty open about this, demonstrated interest is a big deal. We are more likely to admit students that we think are going to come to Davidson than students that we haven't heard anything from whatsoever. And an email is a really easy way to show that interest without having to travel anywhere, without having to do anything else. And so other places might not check the email. They might not get it. It might just be automatically attached to your file. It doesn't matter. That's typically going to be like your big state institutions, for example. They just don't have time when you have 60,000 applicants. That's not something you can track. But if it's a smaller place, that can go a long way in just knowing that, okay, we have this student over here and this student here. It's never one in, one out. But say we get to tip in one more student. Is it the student that we haven't heard a thing from since they hit submit in November? Or is it a student that emailed us, and we're equally excited about both of them, but that has been in touch recently to say, hey, I'm really excited. I still love Davidson. This is why. You're probably going to lean towards that student that's been in contact recently versus the one you haven't heard from, because we want students that are excited to be part of this place. And that's why.
Yeah, and we're just like Davidson in that regards and very transparent about that. And it's on the website, right, of that engagement piece, because again, if Lee and I are your counselors in the committee room, it's so much easier to advocate for a student and really say, I really think they're going to be a good fit for this institution if we've had contact with you, conversations, interview, email exchange, whatever that looked like. So yeah, that is definitely a big piece. And then this other piece might be really obvious, but it's actually quite shocking to see what happens to students in their senior year. So each institution has different policies around this, but oftentimes it is that permission to rescind your offer of admissions if we find out either academically you haven't met the same standards that you had before, right? We see students senior year final transcripts come in May and they have all D's and F's, right? We have the right, depending on what our policy is, to rescind your admissions because it is no longer in alignment with the A student that you were before. Academic sort of standards really need to be met. This also goes with personal standards, right? Depending on your high school, what the policies are, getting in trouble or posting things on social media. You can Google a lot of stories about that's happened in terms of students posting things and the institutions finding out that don't align with our values. Then we might also have the ability to rescind your admissions offer. So really making sure that sort of whatever type of student you were when you were admitted to that institution, to hold to that level of standard, because there's a possibility that we will rescind your offer of admissions.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. We actually planned with a colleague that works at a much larger institution, and he was stating there's usually at least one a year that comes through. I will say too, we do not have time to stalk your social media, so we do not sit there and look up your Instagram accounts. Promise, don't have time for that. It also just feels a little bit weird to do that. But often the things that are going to be an issue, if you say it, somebody's going to screenshot it and then they end up sending it to us, is what more often than not happens. So be a good human being, and colleges can do that. It does matter. It's us protecting our communities, right? So if you want to throw something a little controversial out there, go for it, but just know that that is going to be at the risk of your potential college, depending on the fit and again, the policies at that institution. All right, so another thing to keep doing is just continue your research. A little bit going back to that demonstrated interest piece, like we can see if you're doing virtual faculty panels or visits or things like that. But also that's just good for you. Because you are going to change a little bit over senior year. The things that you're really excited about in November might shift a little bit come March or April. And so it is good for you to, take opportunities if there are, ways to engage with faculty or different ways to get to know a college, looking at different courses, things like that. But be open and don't feel so rigid that you're like, well, I did all my research, now I just sit and wait, because you might feel differently spring of senior year than you did fall of senior year, as far as maybe what some of your priorities are. So keep that research going, keep that communication going.
And then it's also important to communicate and set boundaries. So in terms of communication, right, this is, I think, a lot about your high school counselor, who some of us we're in contact with possibly, right? Making sure that they know what's going on, that, where your admits are, waitlist, lean on them for advice, talking to them about college. But we also really encourage you and your families to sort of set a one-time, once a week, a moment, a dinner, a breakfast, to have conversations about college, and not to let them sort of bleed into every single conversation in your life, because it will become very overwhelming, right? So as a family unit, if every Wednesday we have dinner together, okay, Wednesday nights at dinner is when we talk about college. As a student, you can say, hey, I'm almost done with this process, or I have a scholarship deadline I'm applying to on Sunday. I'm really going to be in my room working on that. Or I don't think I love this institution as much as I love this one, right? Have all those conversations, parents, families, ask all the questions then, but then you don't need to talk about college all of the time, the rest of the time, right? And this goes with your peers as well. Depending on your high school environment, it might be something that people talk about all the time. Where did you get admitted? What's your first choice? What are you looking at? And you also need to know that that's you don't need to share that with everybody, right? It's okay that you're sort of on your track and you're having your experience and that's just within your family unit. And so sort of having that idea now as to who you want to share these things with and who you want to communicate with and when will be really helpful in sort of easing that pressure through the process.
Yeah, I always tell families to have a game plan going into Thanksgiving, depending on your family, because extended family are going to pester you with, where did you apply? Where do you want to go? What do you want to major in? And it is okay to say, I don't know, or I'm not talking about this right now, or, have some sort of, expectation that that's not something you have to answer over and over and over. So I know senior year holidays can be brutal with well-meaning, but very annoying family members. All right, so some last piece of advice, and then we're going to switch it over to have you all ask us any questions that you have for the last few minutes. But, we've talked a little bit about ways to contact colleges. We really prefer to hear from students. You should be the primary contact. You should be leading the conversation. This is you going to college. This is your process. Parents are absolutely stakeholders in this, but we are going to give, I will say, there is more credit given to a student that reaches out than a parent that reaches out on behalf of the student. I have had some also very interesting, files that come through where I've never had any contact with a student and only a parent, and a consistently, in contact parent, but that doesn't say much as far as that student wanting to be there. And so make sure it's you. Sometimes parents do need to call, especially about a financial aid document, something like that. That makes more sense. But when it's, about the college, we prefer students.
Yeah, and we say, again, Lee and I are at smaller institutions. We're the ones going to be answering the emails or picking up the phone, but ask questions. If anything is unclear in the process, if you want more information about the political science department, you're not seeing it on the website, right? Ask those questions. We're here to help, whether we navigate you to a different place. But if there's any uncertainty or gray area in any part of the process, whether that's financial aid, application, the school itself, the culture, the climate, then we're here to either answer those questions for you or connect you to the right people. And so you should never be living in this like, I'm not really sure and I don't want to ask, right? That's a big piece of what our role is in the process.
Yeah, this piece of advice applies more to now than running throughout the process, but however you need to organize yourself to note deadlines and schools you've applied to, do that, whether it's a spreadsheet, plugging things in as reminders on your calendar, whatever you need to do. Deadlines are so insanely important. Some places have a little bit of wiggle room. Some places do not at all. Once it's done, it's done. Especially with financial aid, that is crucial to get all of your pieces in on time. And it can be a lot. So just making sure that you're doing what you need to do to organize those deadlines that are starting now and that will follow you through the whole process.
And again, as we mentioned, a lot of us are on the same type of software. So where our emails come from are very similar as well. And there's always this opt-out line item right at the bottom of the email. And universities get your information from a lot of different places, maybe because you've opted in to receive those emails or because you took the SAT or all sorts of different reasons. And so you might have an overwhelming amount of universities that are emailing you. It is in your best interest. It really helps us. If you have no interest in that university, or of course you've committed somewhere else already, just go ahead and opt out. Click that button at the bottom. We won't send you emails. This will help you stay organized. And it will also help us on the admission side. Oh, okay, I don't need to follow up with this student to see if they're going to apply or if they're going to submit this document because they're clearly no longer interested. They've opted out, right? So utilize that. It doesn't require you to talk to a person if you're embarrassed, right? You can just hit opt out and then you don't receive those emails anymore.
Yeah, and one step further of opt out, and this is definitely helpful in that kind of April timeframe once you've gotten your decisions. But if you're not attending a school, if you've committed somewhere else, this is especially important if you go early decision and you've signed that contract, you need to withdraw your application from the other institutions. One, it's just common courtesy because that way nobody will be reading your application if they don't need to. But two, it also allows us to focus on the students that really are interested in that place. And, think about that for yourself. If you have, a peer that's applying to the same school and that they're going somewhere else or, they don't really care and they just want to see if they're going to get in or not, that's annoying because you would prefer for your application to maybe get a little more attention or to be the one looked at. It's not really how it works, but there are students that will just stay in the pool every year just because and never have any intention of coming. And that's where, Nicole and I do spend that extra time in our institutions looking for that demonstrated interest piece. We can kind of suss that out a lot of times a little bit more. But it's just one, you have to, if it's early decision. Two, it's nice for us to know, especially in April, kind of talking about that waitlist thing, right? We know that these students are still active on the waitlist. If you've withdrawn your application, then we know that there's no chance you're coming, and we can start putting our energy towards students that are still interested in these places. And that's okay. Know that when you send an email to us, sometimes you can click a button and just withdraw. But if you send an email to say, hey, I'm going elsewhere, I'm just not interested anymore, we're not going to email back and be like, well, dang, that stinks. We're going to say, hey, congratulations on making it a choice, or, best of luck, because our goal is to fill a class with cool students that want to be parts of our institution. It's not to, not every student's going to want to come to our school, and that's fine. We want you to find a place that you are excited about. That's the most important part of this process.
So we would love to hear from you. You are welcome, since this is a smaller room, you're welcome to unmute if you're comfortable with that, or you can use the chat feature. The chat just goes to Lee and I, so nobody else will be able to see the chat feature. And we're happy to answer your questions about anything that we talked about here today, or if while you have both of us, you have something else, applying to colleges related. So we have about 7 minutes before this room closes. So just hang out here for you to ask us questions.
Hi, sorry. I have a question. I joined a little late. I'm trying to hop between workshops. So I'm interested in taking a gap year. I don't know if you guys specifically, I know there are a lot of different policies within colleges, but I don't know if taking a gap year is something that I should mention in my application before I submit, or after I submit the application and then reach out to my admissions counselor and ask them about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can dive in first, and you make a great point, right? Each institution is different. Hopefully you found in your exploration that this information is already on the website. At Trinity it is, right? There's a very clear page all about taking a gap year and what that means. I would say not that we have a preference, but traditionally students, because oftentimes they don't know as early as you do, which is great that you know that, but they just apply and they wait for that information to come through of if you're going to be admitted, right, what that looks like. And then once you have that acceptance letter in place or in your hands, then there's a process of what you're able to do in order to request that, what we call sort of a deferral to the next year, right? Where we hold you in the next class, hold a spot for you in the next class. So yeah, for us, it wouldn't matter, but I would say that most students don't disclose that in the application process. They just apply and wait for that information to come through in terms of if they're admitted or not, and then notify the institution or ask about deferral policy so they know what steps they need to take. But Lee might have a slightly different take at Davidson.
Yeah, I think it's mostly similar. Students will come out around, after the admit to say, hey, can I defer for a year? And we have a pretty lax defer policy at Davidson. Basically, if you have a somewhat of a shell of a plan of this is what I plan to do, we're going to say yes to that. Be prepared to pay an additional deposit in most of our schools to hold your space for longer. I have had several students that have talked to me about taking gap years, that have written about it in that additional information section. And that's going to be mixed results at different places, depending on whether or not people are focusing on students that are going to fill their class now. So to be conservative, you could wait, but that could also be just a conversation with your admission officer. Say, hey, I'm thinking about it, because you don't know that you're going to go necessarily. I will say too, especially with COVID, a lot of people's gap year plans have actually been much more fluid until later on when they know that they can actually, put them into place. So I've had numerous students that have had to change their gap year plans a little bit just because they haven't been able to do what they thought they might be able to do. And that's okay. We've rolled with that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Other questions? We have 3 more minutes left. We'll change. Yeah, I was going to say we'll change slides here too for a minute, so you have Leah and I's email address if you do have follow-up questions about anything we said today, or I guess if you're interested in our institutions and you want to connect with us.
Yeah, and I have a quick question in the chat just about application process of, are alums or donors considered in the application process, and how are those stated? So can it help? In some places, yes. In some places, it doesn't really matter. For example, at Davidson, it used to matter a lot more. Over the past several years, we've actually taken out anywhere where we ask for alumni connections. Some students will still, we get to see family, direct family members still, because students will put in where their parents went to college and things like that. They might write about it, but it has become kind of not a lower priority, but we just haven't put the same amount of weight on that as an institutional priority. We do still see a lot of alum students, but some places might have more of a preference. That's a really good question to ask a specific school, because they might push you. For example, at Davidson, what we've switched to doing is just basically said for alums, if you want any sort of kind of, nod to that, you have to apply early decision, or else, that's when we look at alumni connections a little bit more closely. Other than that, we don't really. And other places have different rules, and they might change from year to year. So.
Yeah, and that is my role actually at Trinity, is that I work specifically with legacy families. And so I'm really familiar with this in particular at Trinity. And for us, it has to do more with that additional touch point. So it's sort of an indicator to me that, okay, I want to be in more contact with these parents who are Trinity alums, or we see a lot of sibling legacies come through. That's sort of one of our biggest pieces. And at Trinity, sort of going back to that demonstrated interest piece, actually legacy students yield at a much higher rate. So that means for the number of students that are admitted that are legacy, far more of them come actually than a non-legacy student, because of that connection to the university, that familiarity with the university. And so, in particular, if you are the child of an alum, but you haven't visited campus, instead of me assuming oh, this is so strange, the student's never been to campus, I don't think they're that interested, they haven't done an official visit. If your parent went to Trinity, it is actually very likely that you know a lot about Trinity and you didn't do an official visit because you've been there 10 times with your parent on the weekend or during alumni weekend, right? And so there's a little bit more grace given in that interest piece, because we do assume a level of knowledge and interest in the process because you have this family member who goes to the institution. And so that's also something an institution might do as well.
Awesome. Well, we've got a quick turnaround time to get us ready and you all ready for the college fair portion. So feel free to come see us if you want to learn more about our institutions. We'll be logged in for the next couple hours. But thanks for attending, and we hope to see you all later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.